Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ontario Cryptids. Today we have one story to share with you all. It is a bit lengthy, but I think you will all enjoy it. Just a reminder, if you have an encounter story that you would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story with like-minded people. Now, sit back and relax as we begin with today's encounter. Okay, this takes place September 1976 to 1977. We are going to Sangamon County, Illinois, and the nearest town is Rochester. The first names of the witnesses have been changed. This information is based on witness facts, and it is as close to the events as I can recall. I am blessed with a near photographic memory. First is some background that seems to perhaps relate to the main focus, and as I think it is relevant, I will start thus. 1976, first encounter, vocals heard. The year, as close as I can recall, was 1976, the year before graduation from Rochester High School. It was the fall, shortly after return to classes, but before the autumn chill had set in. On a date that goes forgotten, myself, Tom, and John both grew up in a house outside of Rochester in the unincorporated Buckhart, Illinois, decided we were going to fish some ponds that were formed by overflow from the Sangamon River in the Buckhart area. I cannot say exactly where they were now, other than from memory. I recall that if you were to drive to Buckhart and then turn immediately left onto the blacktop, it would come to a river bridge over the river and a large sandbar there, then continue on north to eventually meet the Mechanicsburg Blacktop. The ponds were found by taking a very narrow unpaved dirt track to the left before the bridge, and then off again through fields until it came to a dead end along the river and ponds fringed with large stands of tall trees. It was perhaps a mile distance from the bridge. We knew the farmer who farmed most of the bottoms in the area from our associations at church, and who had given us permission to fish and access the area. On the day of interest, we needed fresh bait, and decided to follow some other less used field perimeter tracks to a place where we could get near the river in the shade to look for earthworms. We started out walking through the very dense weeds and underbrush until finally we opened into the area where the overhead tree canopy makes less light available to the denser weeds, and lots of open floodplains is available to dig for fresh worms. From this place, you can traverse the riverbanks fairly well, and the trees and weeds you have passed through make a green wall that hides you from the view of the parked vehicle and fields beyond. We went about digging in various places, finding good bait. At some point, perhaps half an hour into our self-occupied digging, Tom decided to go exploring farther down by himself, leaving John and myself more or less digging together. Another half hour or so, I had a pretty good bucket of worms when I felt a strange sensation that I was being watched. I remember having the feeling and dismissing it and not saying a word about it when John and I came across a large pile of earth on the riverbank. It was out of the ordinary and actually looked exactly the size and shape of earth if you were to lay down and cover over a body with soil. We both saw it and both decided no way we were going to dig into it. We joked about how silly to even think about it and bent to the digging. I got the feeling again of being watched and remember carefully looking around out of the corner of my eyes to see if any movement in the weeds or trees. It was approximately 4:30 in the afternoon when we started, so the daylight was beginning to cast longer shadows as the sun got lower. I didn't see anything, but the feeling kept nagging at me, and I more or less lost interest in the worm hunt. At some point shortly thereafter, an interesting thing occurred. It has never happened to me the same way since. John and I were hunkered down on one knee, turning over small spades of earth, when he stopped and I stopped, and without any communication between us, he looked me straight in the eye, and we both turned and looked in the trees and weeds at the exact same time. We never heard a thing. At that instant, we both realized that we had both sensed something, and our minds were reaching that primitive level when you should decide quickly fight or flight. He said to me, "We need to get out of here now." I agreed, and before I could say anything about finding Tom, the need for his search was over, as he almost ran into us as he came looking pale and said, "I don't know what that was, but we're out of here right now." We didn't run, but we made haste following our path back out through the weeds and trees to the waiting pickup truck. When we got to the truck, we all kind of laughed and joked the tension away, and all talked quietly about the heebie-jeebies we had felt. Then we heard something I have never heard before, that hastened our departure. We all heard it. The sound, as close as I come to describing, would be a woman screaming in undulating pain and terror, but it really didn't have a human quality to the sound. We did not stay to investigate, as it was either very, very loud or the proximity was very, very close. We loaded up and spun tires on dirt and cornstalk as we got out of that place. We talked about arming ourselves with rifles, etc., and returning, but soon school and the fall and winter set in, and we passed on that and never went back to that place again. This set up the next segment of the history of the area. 1977, second encounter. Vocals heard. You may recall that I had gotten a rust orange Jeep CJ5 between my junior and senior year at Rochester, and along with Sarah and Mary, who had her dad's old CJ2A, we did a lot of exploring the various wooded trails all around the area. The tales of Creepy River Bottom made for some memorable makeout sessions with Mary, LOL. I had never forgotten about the river drama of the year before, but decided that we were all just acting childish, and that the scream was probably a lynx cat, who do cry like women, even though I don't really know what the possibilities of such species was along the river, if any. That goes unproven to this day. One fall evening, myself and Steve were out four-wheeling about and went down the blacktop to the Blackheart River Bridge. For no apparent reason, we met and passed the Sangamon sheriff's car going the other way. He went down about a quarter mile, and I saw his brake lights, and he did a U-turn, so I knew he was going to do a stop on me. We had no reason to fear anything, but for kicks we decided to cross the bridge and continue as he sped up to catch up. It was just getting true dark outside. Just down about a quarter mile, I knew of a dirt road, now a very muddy, rutted path through the fields along an oil well tank right of way, and turned into it just as the patrol car crossed the bridge in time to see me heading down the path. He never turned on his overhead lights, so we decided to continue. It was four-wheel drive needed, muddy, wet, and rotted. He would not have made it 50 feet. Passing the oil storage tanks, the path got overgrown and continued until it came to a fairly steep hill. You don't really see this bluff above the river from the blacktop, but it is probably at least 100 feet higher than the fields below, and took the Jeep's transmission into low range to climb it with the mud. At the top of the hill, the path continued on into the dark stand of timber, but as we had not explored that before, I backed the Jeep around and parked it so we could see back to the black tops about a mile away. I had turned the lights off before climbing the hill, so I don't think the patrol car even knew how far in we were. We could see him sitting there on the road, parked and probably waiting for us to come back out. We shut off the engine and sat there watching him in the dark while a very light, misty rain started. We made small talk about how long he would wait when after a few minutes he must have gotten a call for real police work, and we watched him drive off. Thinking perhaps he was trying a ruse to get us to come back out, we decided to wait at least a half hour, and barring another squad car showing up, we would just hang out and shoot the bull until then. That's when Steve heard it. I was talking about chicks and remember Steve very seriously saying to me, "Dan, turn off the radio a sec." I shrugged my shoulders and did so, asking him, "What?" He looked in the rearview mirror and said to me, "Did you hear that?" I hadn't heard anything but the radio. He kept looking in the side rearview mirror, and it was totally dark behind us, so I told him that he wasn't going to see anything back there. Keep in mind my Jeep was a soft top. Steve looked at me and said, "I know I heard something back there, and I don't like it." About that time, in the quiet and misty rain, with small cooling clicking sounds from the engine as it sat, I heard it too. It was on the edge of my hearing. The kind of sound where you turn your head a little, not sure of what, but definitely hearing and trying to fathom the sound for identification. "Now you hear it, don't you?" I remember him saying, as he held onto the door handle like he wanted to make sure somehow it couldn't be open. It sounded very low frequency, almost a wet, guttural rolling sound, perhaps like a deeper wet rolling purr, although not like any house cat I have heard, but that is as close as I could get to describing it. We could feel the vibration of the sound as it got distinctively louder as it seemed to get slowly closer. I remember saying that I had enough of this, and Steve agreed, and I fired up the Jeep and turned on the lights and hauled ass down the hill. We didn't see a thing but mud, corn, and weeds until we got onto the blacktop. We got to the river bridge and I pulled over. Steve and I discussed what the hell and decided that we would come back in the daylight and reconnoiter the area. 1977, third encounter, sighting. Several weeks later, on a clear sunny Saturday, we followed that path in the Jeep back to the top of the hill. There was a very old path through the trees, perhaps from some earlier hardwood logging, or maybe a shortcut for farm purposes at one time, but it was easy to tell that my Jeep was the first vehicle to travel up there in a long time. The path meandered around and more or less dead-ended in two places, forming as it were a large Y in configuration. We both got out and walked and searched and couldn't find no signs of anything out of the ordinary. Eventually we discussed the incident of the sounds with Tom and Mike, who really wanted to tag along, and so a return nighttime trip was planned. This is where it gets to the thick of it. On that night, I was driving my Jeep with Steve up front and Mike and Tom in the back of the CJ5. We went back down that muddy, rotted path on the top of the hill and then drove way back to the dead end of that path that forked to the left. We had to cross a smaller fallen log in low range to get back to that point, but it had a wide open area about 100 feet in diameter that made a good place to turn the Jeep around so it was pointing in the right direction. We got into place and shut off the engine and sat quietly taking in the sounds of the night and letting ourselves adjust. An hour or so and Mike more or less thought we were yanking his chains and began to make jokes, etc. as we passed the time. It was a typical fall night with light misty rain and humidity. Steve got everyone very quiet and we listened close. That's when we decided that someone or something was circling our position very quietly. A twig would crunch, then slowly another some distance away. This went on in total darkness for an hour. Finally, the circling of our position seemed to return to its starting point between the Jeep and an undetermined distance. Tom had a large 6-volt lantern flashlight in the rear seat. If you remember Jeep soft tops, you will note that the back window area is huge and is basically a top to bottom and side to side clear acrylic sheet. Mine was a little scratched up from scraping winter frost, but you could still see out it fairly well. While Steve and I sat and pondered if our ears had played tricks and we were hearing what we wanted to hear, Tom got very quietly terrified in the back seat. I ignored his first request to start the Jeep and leave because it was not normal for him to be so quiet, but then I remembered how he was pale and reacted the year before at the river bottom when we were looking for bait. He got our attention. Steve asked him, "What's going on?" And Tom said very somberly, "There is something behind us, watching, and we need to leave now." I looked at Steve, and Mike kind of snickered while Tom had the light more or less shining through the window, lighting up the area behind us. I was whispering to Steve about if he had heard the same sounds as before, when Mike said, "Oh no," and got absolutely scared. Real scared. I am making a joke of it scared. Tom began to whimper some and pulled on my shoulder and made it clear he wanted to leave right now. I and Steve were still not sure if they were pulling our leg when I asked Tom why, and he said, "Look," and just pointed the light over his shoulder without looking. Steve and I saw it, and I know that Mike and Tom had already seen it. My memory is this. As I looked over Tom's shoulder into the trees directly behind the Jeep, a large, tall figure of a man standing is about as high as the Jeep top, a normal suspended Jeep, and this was a foot or more taller, seemingly dark matted brown color species of something bipedal ducked slowly behind a tree. I had a very fleeting glimpse of red reflective eyes, meaning man or predator. The fact it ducked slowly behind a tree is what suggested other than animal intelligence, and is what spurred me to start the engine and hightail it out of there. Tom would claim it followed us in the trees at a distance as we left, but I cannot confirm that. We never went back there again. It is important to note that whatever it was, person or not a person, it could have done us harm easily and chose not to. Perhaps it was curious as well. I love the way the writer wrote this encounter. It reminds me of an old-time writer, just the words that were chosen. In other words, it was very colorful and very descriptive, and I truly liked it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This was a bit long for one story, but it was good nonetheless. I hope you guys are enjoying the new format. That's going to be it for me today. I will be posting in my community chat my freshly bought Christmas tree. It took about a week for the leaves to finally settle once it was sitting in water. And this weekend we'll get around to decorating it. So I can't wait for that. So I'll take a before and after shot so you guys can see the tree before and after it's decorated. Anyways, if these stories reminded, or I should say, if this story reminded you of an encounter that you may have had and would like to share, then please forward your stories to OntarioCryptids@gmail.com. I would be honored to share your story on this channel. Thank you guys for listening until the end. I truly appreciate it. Please hit the like button on your way out and smash that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with all my latest uploads. Have yourselves a great weekend, and I hope to see you all next week right here on Ontario Cryptids.